Hello everyone, Assalamualaikum. I'm Atira and today you are listening to another episode of Palestinian Diaries and I am joined again with Puan Sri Norma Hashim. She is the renowned author of the Prisoners Diaries. How are you, Puan Sri?
I'm fine,
How's the
Alhamdulillah.
Ramadan is going for you so
Alhamdulillah.
far?
Very
It's almost a
enjoyable.
week.
Yes, yes,
Time
very
is
nice.
going by really fast. And we have another guest on our podcast today, Yousef Aljamal. He is the translator of the Prisoners Diaries. He joined us on the previous episode as well. He is all the way from Istanbul. He is joining us via Zoom today. And over the years, Yousef has spoken at various forums and platforms to highlight the plight of Palestinians living under Israeli military occupation. How are you today, Yousef?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for hosting us today.
How's your Ramadan going so far? Is it going well?
It's going well, like the fifth day, it's so fast.
It is really fast. Okay, and great. That's good to know that you guys are doing well. And on today's episode, we are going to talk about hunger strike. I believe it is very common within Palestinian prisoners to go on hunger strike. Am I correct, Puan Sri?
Well, they have done hunger strikes many times as a last resort to get what they need to gain their rights.
Okay,
Yes.
and it is not something new. It's not something that is in common for them to do.
No, I mean, Palestinians have gone on hunger strike since the occupation of 1967 of East Jerusalem and the West Bank and Gaza. The first recorded hunger strike, I think, was in Ramley Prison, 1969, where the prisoners were protesting against meager portions of food, poor quality food. They were not even allowing writing material, and so the prisoners went on hunger strike, and that's what's ended when they put the prisoners in solitary confinement. But that was one of the first hunger strikes recorded. Many more since then.
And it is still
yes.
going on until today.
Yes, on and off they will be. In fact, recently when the prisoners were planning a hunger strike, because the new government with the new Minister of Security, Itmar Ben-Gvir, he's very right-wing, very racist and fascistic. He was going to implement even things like reducing the amount of water for showering and things like that. And they were going to do a mass hunger strike, but in the end, the government decided not to go ahead
Okay.
with all these new restrictions on prisoners.
I see.
Yeah.
So that was the reason they basically called it off?
They called it off in the last minute because the Israeli government decided not to implement these new restrictions. Maybe Yousef can describe what they were.
Yeah, Yusuf, could you share with us as well?
The new Israeli Minister of National Security, Itmar Ben-Gvir, is very racist, and his party, the Jewish Power Party, which is made of 14 members of Knesset in the Israeli parliament, decided to introduce a law that allows executing Palestinian prisoners accused of killing Israelis. In the past, this was not the case. So this is the first time, at least on paper, like on theory, that Israel is introducing a law to execute Palestinian prisoners. Itmar Ben-Gvir, for example, wanted to impose restrictions on family visits. He claimed that Palestinian prisoners live a luxurious life in Israeli jails, which is very ironic. Reducing the amount of, water and like the time, 4 minutes only to have a shower. Family visits, as I said, and their access to the market inside the jail, that they should not have many items. And that's why in the past, Palestinian political prisoners have staged hunger strikes. So every single right they have now, which should be given to them without even going on a hunger strike, was a result of a mass hunger strike. Even papers and books and access to education, their ability to talk to their family, this was not the case for so many years, except 2 years ago when they staged a mass hunger strike, which gave them the right to speak to their family for 15 minutes a week. In the past, this was not the case. Sometimes Palestinian political prisoners would go on a hunger strike to protest the conditions. Like in the summer, one time they decided to go on a hunger strike because it was too hot in the desert, and they asked for fans. So very basic rights, books and newspapers, their access to some TV channels, their ability to listen to radio or have education or sometimes medical care, because many of them are denied, this medical care. And some of them are placed in solitary confinement. So they go on hunger strike to force the prison administration to release some of their inmates from solitary confinement. So the reasons and the battles and why they go on a hunger strike varies over time. And in most cases, it's like mass hunger strikes, but also we have some individuals, prisoners, who go also on a hunger strike.
Okay, Puan Sri, but could you explain what exactly is hunger strike? Because I don't think everyone or myself fully understand what it is.
Hunger strike is when the prisoner decides to just refuse all food in protest against their deprivation of their rights. So it's the hunger strike. During the hunger strike, a prisoner will just take water and salt. They believe the salt actually prevents the stomach from rotting. It helps them to survive. And this is why you have hunger strikes that go up to, I think the record is about 160 days or so, I think. So that's how they can last so long. But of course, just on water and salt, it means that their organs will fail, they lose their sight, they lose function of the kidneys will be damaged, and they can't speak after that as well. Sometimes it's very long term, but this is what it takes. And prisoners go on hunger strike because it's a last resort. When conditions are so bad and they feel they can't continue, they will go on hunger strike. And this is the only weapon they have. So the body is their weapon, the only weapon they have.
And the fact that you mentioned salt and water, I read a piece from your book by Kadir Adnan, where, and I quote, he said, for 66 days, I refused food, I did not eat, and I just drank salt with water. I called it the soul of dignity.
Yes.
So I assume it is a common thing to consume salt and water. I never knew.
Yes, not just
it's
water,
a thing.
Yes, they need the salt to maintain the strike longer. Of course, they have to drink water because, without water, you can't survive 2 days as well. So, and also hunger strikes normally are quite long, drawn out. It takes some time before the Israelis will give in to them. Most hunger strikes, I think, many of them have succeeded in winning rights for the Palestinians, important rights as well. As Yousef mentioned earlier, the right to education, because before this, the Israelis did not want the prisoners to be educated. But nowadays, you have many prisoners who come out of prison after 10, 20 years, and they already have a master's degree or bachelor's or PhD. So they become experts and specialists in subjects. So these are important rights that were won through hunger strikers.
That they are fighting for,
Yes.
the main reason behind
Yes.
the whole
Yes.
protest.
Yes.
And Yousef, I'm pretty sure you have met those prisoners who have been on hunger strike, right? Have you?
Yes, I met some of them.
And apart from fighting for their rights, is there any other reason why they go on hunger strike?
So we have two types of hunger strikes, mass hunger strikes and individual hunger strikes. In the case of individual hunger strikes, it's mostly prisoners staging a hunger strike to protest their administrative detention. And administrative detention was originally a form of detention introduced by Britain in Palestine during the colonization of Palestine in 1936, and it was used later by the Israelis. So it's still used by Israel, and it allows Israel to detain Palestinian prisoners without charge or trial indefinitely. So they would reduce the sentence of 6 months every 6 months, sometimes 3 months. And the prisoners who spent up to 15 years in a prison under administrative detention without charge or trial. So prisoners go on a hunger strike to protest this form of detention, and they call and ask to be charged. And we have different examples of prisoners, including on a hunger strike to protest their administrative detention. At the same time, mass hunger strikes is more about gaining collective rights, like family visits, their ability to watch some TV channels or listen to some, radio stations, their ability to have notes, papers, pens, and books, that they should not be transferred from one prison to another without a reason, that they should not be placed under solitary confinement, and that they should be in like one prison cell. So there are different reasons. And of course, throughout history, Palestinian political prisoners were able to gain some rights because of these, hunger strikes. For example, when the Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit was held in Gaza for 5 years, from 2006 to 2011, Gaza prisoners did not have access to family visits for 5 years. Now they do. And the same applies, to prisoners from the West Bank, where family visits are denied from time to time, as a form of collective punishment against some prisoners. So they go on a hunger strike to, win these rights back, to have better conditions in jail, to have less number of prisoners in one cell, or, just to have a fan in the summer so that they, especially in the desert, there's some prisons in the desert and it's too hot for them and humid. So they go on a hunger strike to make sure that they, the living conditions in the prison are good enough for them to survive there.
And I'm pretty sure with the living condition that is given, that is horrible, and on top
Yeah.
of doing the hunger strike. But I do have a question, going back to the piece by Kadir Adnan. He said they wanted me to end my hunger strike and negotiate, but I bluntly refused. But isn't it easier for the Israelis if the prisoners basically died? How
I
come
think
they
it's-
would-
Yeah,
they
you
would
find
give
very
in?
few Palestinians. They don't want Palestinians to die because it's just very bad press for the Israelis.
I see.
So they will hang on as long as they can until the prisoner is really, really very far gone. Then they will let him go. But they make sure that the prisoner has gone through a hell already before that.
Yeah, because
Yes.
I thought because the point of them arresting, they just trying
Yeah.
to strip away their rights, basically making their life difficult. I thought it would be easier if those
No, they,
prisoners just
they tend to try
passed
to
away.
avoid. I mean, there are prisoners. In fact, I think 200 prisoners have already died in prison over the years from either medical neglect, torture, also torture and beatings and things like that. A few prisoners have died on hunger strike. Yes, if actually in this book, Muhammad Alian. Oh, sorry. Yes, our book called A Shared Struggle. In fact, is a book about Palestinian and Irish hunger strikers. This book came out a couple of years ago, which Yousef and I did. So we focused on Palestinian and Irish hunger strikers. So one of the stories was written by Muhammad Alian, who is a lawyer, and he was talking about a hunger strike in 1980 when the prisoners were brought to a new prison in the desert called Nafha prison in the desert, and it was very hot, and they were put in prisons with no windows, and there were reptiles that came into the prison. So the prisoner could not live like that. And he was saying that it was, when they moved to Nafha, it was the beginning of our hell. There were no prisons, there were no windows in the cells. We were locked up behind heavy iron doors, forced to share our cells with reptiles who ran on our beds and ate from our dishes. And then we decided we didn't care what we might lose. We decided to pay a heavy price and go on hunger strike because we preferred death to living like this.
They just can't stand.
Yes, they rather die than to live without dignity in conditions like this. So in that hunger strike, 120 prisoners were on hunger strike. And the end result was, unfortunately, 2 of the prisoners who were force-fed. Unfortunately, when you force-feed a person, you put a tube through the mouth, and the tube is supposed to go to your stomach, but it went through the lungs of 2 of the prisoners. It caused a heavy bleeding, and of course, if you force a tube in the lung of a person with and you put water in, they died. So in this hunger strike, Ali Jafari and Rasim Halawal were 2 prisoners that died in agony. It was just terrible.
That is terrible. It's one thing to die on a hunger strike, but the way that
they force-fed,
yes. Is that like a common method that they also use on prisoners who are on hunger strike?
I think this was because it was 1980. They were not, because they really were very, how do you say, they did not want to give in at all, and so they were very severe in how they punished the prisoners who were on hunger strike. Yes.
And just now you mentioned that this book is together with the Irish.
Yes.
Irish.
Because there's a parallel history.
Yes.
Of the Irish hunger strikers and the Palestinian hunger strikers.
And
in fact, the cover of the book, if you look at it, it's an old picture I found. The mothers of prisoners in Nafha prison, the prison in the desert, and they stood there in solidarity with the Irish hunger strikers, because in 1981, the IRA political prisoners as well were on hunger strike to protest their imprisonment.
And Yousef, I understand that the whole Irish hunger strike, you are well informed about this as well. Could you share with us how does the issue of hunger strikes connect Palestine and Ireland? Could you share with us?
There is a shared history, and this is the title of the book, of settler colonialism by Britain between the case of Palestine and the case of Ireland, and that's why Palestinians connect with the experience of the Irish people, their struggle against settler colonialism. And even the word boycott, which is very common now in Palestine, originated in Ireland, where a landlord called Boycott, a British landlord, was boycotted, and people use this word to warn others not to interact with him. And this is how the word boycott was introduced in Ireland. So the Palestinian people have always connected with the Irish people and the struggle, and the political prisoners over there. So in the 80s, for example, and the example Norma just mentioned, Palestinians wrote a letter, Palestinian political prisoners wrote a letter from Nafha prison in solidarity with Irish hunger strikers, IRA hunger strikers, who were on a hunger strike, including Bobby Sands, and some of them lost their life. We did the book in collaboration with some individuals, including Danny Morrison and the Bobby Sand Trust in Belfast. They provided us with stories of Irish hunger strikers, and we also had stories of Palestinian hunger strikers, and we put them in one book because we do believe that the connection is very strong. If you go to Belfast now in North Ireland, you will see a lot of murals, Palestinian murals there. So as I said, the people of Palestine connect with this, experience. And when it comes to hunger strike, specifically, it was the Irish political prisoners who first staged this form of protest that was later used in Palestine.
Mm.
And because of the parallel history of settler colonialism, um, I mean, you find a lot of support for Palestine in Ireland these days. And the murals and, the protests, and there's a general sense of solidarity and boycott in Ireland to support the Palestinian people. And hence we have this book that connects political prisoners in Palestine with political prisoners in Ireland.
I see. Is there anything you want to?
Oh, actually, in fact, the
Yeah.
book was reviewed by many Irish MPs.
I see.
So we got a lot of reviews
So it's
from.
very impactful.
Yes, yes. Say, for instance, Jerry Adams was president of Sinn Féin, the political party there, and he was in prison before as well.
Mm-hmm.
He said, in this joint Palestinian Irish Republican narrative, we witness the parallels between heroic struggles for freedom and the commonality of resistance against the overwhelming military might. So, they see that this is the parallel where they have endured, the
Yes.
Palestinians are going through now. Yeah, and we've also got Richard Boyd Barrett, who speaks out very loudly for Palestine. You'll see many videos about him speaking out. He's an MP as well.
Mm-hmm.
And he's saying that Israeli apartheid state is worse than apartheid South Africa. He said that he tells everyone join the movement for boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel.
So now that people are more aware
Yeah.
of what is going on, including the hunger strike, but is it still a method that is used by the prisoners until today?
Yes. In fact, they've just called off the hunger strike, as I mentioned. They mentioned earlier. Yeah, there was a hunger strike that was planned recently, and but because against what Yousef had mentioned about all these new measures that the new racist government was going to impose on the prisoners, but the Israeli government decided not to impose the new restrictions because I think they are worried about their own political turmoil in Israel at the moment with their own Israeli citizens.
So their people themselves are not happy with the current government?
No, they're not. I think they find it embarrassing that these are openly racist, and on the world platform, like one of the ministers went to the US and many of the lawmakers refused to meet
I
the
see.
Israeli members of the government because it's just so embarrassing to be standing side by side with an openly racist person who calls for the eradication of Palestinian villages and supports violence and burning of homes, Palestinian homes, and killing them. So even the US people are embarrassed to be seen with people like this.
I assume it's a good thing that they put off the restriction in the end for the
Yes,
Palestinians.
Yes, of course,
as
it may
well.
be temporarily, of course, because the government is still the same.
Yeah.
We still have the government. It means
They will
that
try
it's in
to
their mind.
impose
Yes.
in any way that they can.
Yes.
And Yousef, have you maybe spoken to any of the Palestinian after what were their reaction when they found out that the government decided not to enforce the new restrictions?
Generally, there is a strong sense of solidarity outside prisons with Palestinian political prisoners. So the Palestinian street always follow the news of, what is happening inside prisons. And even at some points, clashes would break out outside prison in solidarity with prisoners, especially when they are on a hunger strike. So Palestinians were relieved to learn that Palestinians would not be going on a hunger strike because the Israeli government decided to, lift these restrictions they wanted to impose on prisoners. But at the same time, there are individual hunger strikes going on now, including Khadr Adnan, who was released and rearrested many times, and he went on multiple hunger strikes in the past, as explained in the book, starting from 2011-12 up until now. He's in prison and he's on 51 day of hunger strike today, again to protest his administrative detention. Every time Israel places him under administrative detention without charge or trial. So they're still despite the fact that the mass hunger strike was called off, there are individual hunger strikes inside the prison, and the potential death of a Palestinian political prisoner would escalate the situation outside the prison for sure.
I was wondering, do teenagers or children, do they participate in the hunger strike as well? And I understand that there are teenagers, young boys and girls who are also arrested. They are also detained. Do they participate in the hunger strike?
So, children and women are excluded from hunger strikes inside mass hunger strikes inside prison. But we have examples of individual uh, female prisoners, such as Hana Shalabi, who went on a hunger strike for 42 days in 2012 to win her freedom. She was deported to Gaza. She's from the West Bank.
I see.
Yeah.
And
So-
have you ever heard stories on women who also?
Yes.
At the same time, when sometimes parallel hunger strikes outside prison in solidarity with Palestinian political prisoners, in which some teenagers, take place, but it's symbolic hunger strikes for 1 or 2 days. Sometimes people go longer than that, especially former political prisoners who know what it means to go on hunger strike. So we have sometimes, especially when it comes to mass hunger strikes, we have parallel hunger strikes outside prison where Palestinians who support political prisoners also go on hunger strike to show solidarity with those inside.
I see. That's not a good thing to hear either way, even though they're like excluded. But is there anything you wanted to chime in?
No, I mean, well, individual hunger strikes, yeah, as he says, are going on all the time. Actually, in this book, we have a story by Akram Rimawi, and he was talking about when he was in prison and he had asthma, and he couldn't breathe, but he was denied medication. And then he was in a desperate condition because he was suffering all the time from asthma. Can you imagine having asthma and not knowing,
Yes.
when it's going to be the fatal one? So he decided he was just nothing to lose. He was just going to go on hunger strike. And he was on hunger strike because he said that I was sick of pain and suffering. Either you die or you live with dignity. So he didn't want to continue like this. So he decided just go on hunger strike. And he was on hunger strike for 104 days.
That's a
until
long time.
until he could not walk or talk or see. He even lost his sight after so long.
That's one of the side effects of after going on
It
a hunger
affected
strike.
his eyes, yeah. Yes, and then his body was swelled up, and on the 104th day, they decided to let him free.
Just like that.
Yes,
After like
yes, but
all those.
yeah, after all that, and but he still suffers from the long-term effects of the hunger strike because he was already a sick person.
Yes.
Yes.
It's very, very horrible. And the
Yeah.
fact that you mentioned that after 104 days,
Yeah, that's three.
they're finally
Almost 4
yeah,
months.
almost 4 months. They
Yeah.
finally freed him.
Yes.
Which brings me back to my final question before we end the podcast. Yousef, is this the only way for them to be freed? Is this the only way for the prisoners to be free? Is to go on hunger strike?
I mean, for administrative detainees, history has proven that this is the only way. Israel has never released a political prisoner who is placed under detention without charge or trial. Just like that. The only reason they did so with a dozen of Palestinian political prisoners was because they went on a hunger strike. They've never released a Palestinian political prisoner who went on a mass hunger strike. So mass hunger strikes are more like about gaining rights, right, rather than gaining freedom, because Israel would not release a prisoner who is charged under no condition, even if they die in a prison. But when it comes to prisoners who are not charged, they have no justification to hold them, so they eventually release them. But in many cases, they also rearrested them, except for prisoners who ended up in Gaza, who are originally from Gaza or who were deported to Gaza. Then begin their freedom.
So they were just freed for a while, just
Yes,
to
like
give them.
Khadi Adnan has been under administrative detention many, many times. That's why he's been on hunger strike many times as well to get his freedom. Administrative detention means that you're arrested on like secret information.
Yes.
Nobody tells you why you're arrested. So you're waiting there, and if you're charged and you've gone to court and you're charged and you get 5 years, 10 years, at least you know something. If you're under administrative detention, it's very open-ended.
Mm-hmm.
Every 6 months they send you to court to renew it. So you're just detained. So it's very tortured in a way,
Yes.
mentally and
So
emotionally.
basically, you don't see the light at the end of the tunnel.
No, and you can't see your children, and you're thinking, when will you be released to see your family and all that. So that's why it's a horrible kind of suffering. That's why people decide to go on a hunger strike to get that freedom. It's very unfair, obviously,
Yes.
because they're not even charged. So you're forcing a person on hunger strike who hasn't been charged. You just put him in prison, not for a very open-ended term.
So,
as well.
Puan, just before we end the podcast, do you think the prisoners gain what they want, gain through the hunger strike?
Yeah, the mass hunger strikes, as Yousef had mentioned, have gained them many rights, which they should get anyway if they were in another country. If they were in a Western democracy, they would be having access to, fans, education, books, These are normal things. Sometimes they ask for a phone to call the families, the public phone. Family visits, these are basic rights.
Yeah.
So they had to go on hunger strike to get basic rights. So basically it has worked. The mass hunger strikes have worked, especially when many prisons take part. So the Israeli authorities are like, they see all the prisoners in all the prisons working together, everyone on hunger strike. Then they tend to
Worry?
give in they worry, and that's a better chance as well that the prisoners will get what they want.
But that's
Yeah.
horrible, isn't it? That's the only
Yes.
way for them
Yes,
to be
yes.
freed. Basically,
Yeah.
they have to torture themselves.
They call it the battle of battle of empty stomachs. Yeah, it's the war that you can only win with your body.
Yes, but then they have to suffer with the
Yes, because
consequences
there are no weapons other
afterwards.
than their body, right? Yes, yeah, that's what they have.
That's a really great input that you share. And Yousef, thank you so much for joining our podcast again today. And thank you, Puan Sri, for sharing
Thank you.
very insightful. And I hope that you guys could share more in the future, maybe on social media. And to those who are tuning in, thank you so much for listening. And if you missed out on this episode, it will be available on Sinar Daily's YouTube channel, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. We're going to do more episodes talking about Palestinian prisoners. I'm pretty sure you have a lot more to share on their suffering and the reality of the world that is going on until today. I'm Atira signing off for Palestinian Diaries. Happy Ramadan to all the Muslims out there, and see you next time.